Hi there and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video is regarding using VBA to determine if a font is installed on the machine or not. In my case specifically, this was relating to an access report in which I was using a non-traditional font. Now, instead of having issues and whatnot, I used this type of code to determine if the font existed, and then if it didn't, at runtime, just switch it out for something more traditional. You can also use it to report back a clear message to your end user to tell them, hey, you need to install this font. You could technically, even through code, install the font before opening the report. So there's different avenues you can take here, but the first step in any of this is first determining if the font exists. So in the article, my newest article, I mentioned that I had previously published an article on how to do this, how you can determine if a font exists. But I used word automation. So we're going to use Microsoft Word and we're going to go through the font list that it has. And this works absolutely fine and I have used it. But it's not exactly ideal because we are having now to have Word installed, and not everyone does have Word installed on their PC, and we're now shipping it off to another application. There's delays, there's performance, all these considerations, and in an ideal world I don't want to be automating another application in this way if I don't have to. And when I was doing some spring cleaning, going through some old code, I came across something I had completely forgotten about. I had used it years and years and years ago when I first started off in development. So 15, 20 years ago is my best guess. Back then I didn't document things well, so I can't even tell you where the original copy came from. I've slightly tweaked it, but it certainly isn't my idea per se. But if we come back to the article that I'm talking about today, and you just scroll down, you'll see here the latest version of my function. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to copy it. We're going to just open up Excel. Now this is a VBA routine, so it will work in Excel, Word, Access. Doesn't make a difference. As long as you're in a VBA environment, it will work. And we'll just go straight into VBA. We'll insert a standard module, and I will paste in the function. Now I'm going to do a debug to make sure there are no problems, and let's examine this to begin with. So right off the bat here, I'm using conditional compilation to determine if I'm using early or late binding. So if we're using early binding, we have to declare a library, and that's marked right here. Early binding, we need to declare the OLE automation library. If we're using late binding, so if this was false, because true is for early binding, false is for late binding, then we don't, because it's going to create its own instance of the OLE automation library for us, so we wouldn't have to jump through those hoops. That said, this is one of these rare cases where in reality, you can probably just use it in early binding mode. Why do I say that? Because typically, whether it be Word, Excel, Access, when you start a new Excel workbook, an Access database, a Word document, by default, OLE automation is already included. So by default, early binding should work. However, if you go and remove it, well, then you can always switch this guy here to false and use late binding. But like I said, if you come to Tools References, you'll see that typically a brand new workbook in Excel has it already. These are the 4 that are already there by default. So we don't even need to go and set it. It's done for us. Now the function itself is very simple. We're going to set an instance of OLE automation to the standard font. Okay, so we're going to create this object. Then what we're going to do is we're going to try to set that object's font name to the font we're looking for. Okay, so we're going to pass it a font name, and here we're trying to set that object's font name to that exact font that we're looking for. Now, if the font exists, this operation will be successful. If the font does not exist, it will not. So the font name will not change. In which case, we come down here and we do a check, a comparison between the font we're looking for and the font name that we just set. And if they are equal to one another, then we know everything is good, the font exists. But if, like I said, the font doesn't exist, this will remain unchanged and will not equal out. So therefore, we will not get a value of 0. So therefore, we know the font does not exist. It will return a false. So that's it. We're just simply using this object to test if the font exists. If it switches to it, we know it exists. If it doesn't switch to it, therefore the font does not exist. It's that simple. How do we use it? Really simple. I give some examples, but if we just come here quickly, you can come here and do a simple test. Arial, you'll see it's true. Arial narrow, there you go. We could do my own font. No, it does not. Daniel font does not. Times Roman, it exists. As you can see, really simple to use. This is one of the easiest ones to use. Very straightforward, single line. So down here, I give 2 examples, which is what we just did in the immediate window, or here's a more explicit usage example that you'd integrate into a subroutine procedure somewhere where you test it. So if it exists, then it would come here. If it didn't exist, you'd be in the else part of that statement, and then you'd act accordingly. So you could swap out the font, you could pop up a message to the user. The choice is yours. It depends on what you're trying to achieve as a developer. So there you have it. Really straightforward code to determine if a font is installed on a PC. As you can see, this is bitness independent, this is application independent, so there's none of this worrying about. The most complicated thing for you to do is to decide if you're using early binding and late binding, and simply switch the true to false if you want to use late binding. But as I said, typically in Office at least, we can just jump straight to early binding. And of course, it is slightly more performant to use the early binding when the reference library is already there. We don't have to wait for the initialization of the create object. I'm going to stop there. Enough blabbering on here. Have a great day, and we will see you in the next video, everyone. Take care.